Well, it's spring, and the election is about to be called. It sounds like the rumor is it's going to be called on Sunday. We all heard that the spring election. Premier EB's power grab draws some critics, and the Canadian economy in trouble. The voices get louder on scrapping the EV mandates, and the Liberals knew that their housing target was pure fantasy. And R2D2 is a reality. All that and more on the Really Big Show. With me, Ian Burns. I'm Jim Check with Kelowna Now, and off to a stumbly start, but we're early because it's Thursday, because you have the big white snow report here at 10 o'clock. How you doing, Ian?
Howdy ho.
Yeah, so a beautiful day in the Okanagan, blue sky, traffic flowing well. How's it looking? You had a beautiful day yesterday in Ottawa.
Yeah. It's about 12 at the minute.
There you go.
Bit blustery and a little bit cloudy as well. So it's a mixed bag.
So here we are, the first day of spring, March 20th. I think around 2:01 it became spring, right? So there you go. The flowers are starting to come out. I'm sure in Vancouver and Victoria, some of the blossoms are out already, but looks like a beautiful start to the spring.
Yeah, I've been hearing the blue jays sing. That's always nice. A few little birds chirping away.
And if you've been watching Kelowna Now's Really Big Show for a while now, you'd know that a lot of people were calling for a spring election, and it sounds like that's actually going to happen.
I mean, yeah. Obviously they've not actually
Next slide
they've
there,
not officially
Ronald.
said, but what has happened here is that the Liberal Party, or anyway, people that serve Mark Carney, it doesn't really matter who, have briefed select members of the media. They've sent an email or they've called them up and they've told them that this election is happening. But for some mysterious reason, they don't want to announce it. I think, or they don't want to announce it officially. They want to do it through this sort of like backdoor method. I find that quite unusual, but I mean, I can only assume that it's to get everybody within the Liberal Party, everybody on that side, on the sort of left side, ready so that they can start making plans, get prepared, start thinking about where they're going to spend their advertising money and so on, how they're going to organize themselves. But it is an odd way to do it. I mean, this reminds me very much of the government of Boris Johnson, which leaked absolutely everything before it happened. And actually, come to think of it, we don't have to go across the Atlantic. I mean, Justin Trudeau's government was like that as well. They leaked things, so they briefed people behind the scenes first and then released. A very strange thing to do, but anyway, that's
Well,
Mark Carney.
if you're trying to get the talking points in line, if you're trying to use some of the media that is favorable to you, obviously that's a good way to do it so that they can have their story and their narrative ready to go.
I guess so, yeah, and it's a way of kind of bestowing favor, isn't it, on
Yep.
certain outlets? Because obviously they haven't told everyone. They've told Canadian Press, CTV, and CBC, and probably the Globe and Mail. I haven't actually
Yeah.
checked the Globe and Mail, but I imagine they've also told them. So they've kind of told their chums, yeah.
So it's kind of like you have to kind of be beholden because if you want the pipeline to continue, you just have to toe the line. The pipeline,
Perhaps that's it, yeah.
the pipeline, and the money spigot.
Yeah.
There you
Something
go.
like that, yeah.
Something like that, right? Something like that. Exactly. Something like that. There you go. And we're not privy to either one of those things, neither the pipeline or the money spigot. So
Yeah, I mean, just out of interest, I've gone on the National Post's website now as we speak. The National Post is basically the only centre-right um, outlet in Canada. They don't seem to have it. So there's your answer. If you're wondering what's going on here,
yeah.
that's what's going on. It's friends of the Liberal Party have been given this information by the looks of things.
So BC Greens want answers about Premier EB's emergency powers legislation. The BC Green Party says they need to explain why its proposal for broad-reaching emergency cabinet powers are needed before its two members support the legislation.
Yeah, that's kind of predictable, I would say, that they would do this, the Greens. As usual, they have a gigantically outsized influence on politics in British Columbia. They're a tiny, insignificant fringe party, but have a habit of being able to get themselves into these extraordinary positions of influence and power because of the NDP's inability to win large majorities. So usually you wouldn't care what a tiny party says because they're insignificant. Nobody cares what they say. But in this case, it matters very much what the Green Party says because they are the kind of the protection for the NDP, the protection of their majority. It keeps them safe in power. So I think
They
he is going to
all
have to answer to them.
They hold the balance of power. Interim leader Jeremy Valeriette, I think I've got that right, said in a statement, while he understands the urgency in the state of the situation, he doesn't like the vague wording and could allow for sweeping economic decisions without clear limits and transparency. And he says there's no need for secrecy. And I would go on to say, like, the other provinces aren't doing this. Why does Premier Eby seem to need this power when other provinces aren't doing it, and they're more affected by trade than British Columbia?
Yeah, I mean it's going to be an obvious comparison, isn't it? And it's not going to be a favorable one if EB really is the only person that does this. Though, sorry, the only premier. Though he did say that he would like to see, or something along the lines of this. I paraphrase now, but he said something along the lines of, "I would like to see other provinces do this." And he hinged that on interprovincial trade, which has been this, intractable obstacle in really the history of Canada. That's just kind of plagued the history of Canada, particularly economically. So, I mean, from that perspective, you can understand why he's saying that, because the reason that it's so intractable, the reason that we're still stuck with these stupid barriers, is because there are a lot of vested interests in the provinces that want to protect their little slice of the pie, and they don't want to lose whatever it is they have by opening up interprovincial trade.
And
So, in that sense, you can kind of understand it because they would probably have to do something along these lines to break down those barriers and those vested interests. But yeah, if he's left there on a limb, like just him, nobody else joining him in this enabling act or whatever you want to call it, then he's going to look a bit dodgy, isn't he? And
well, Dan,
eventually, he's probably going to have to water it down.
Danielle Smith and Scott Moe have both said that they've torn down their trade barriers and they didn't need to use these powers. And imagine if Danielle Smith had done this first, what the NDP would be screaming about Danielle Smith's government.
Oh yeah, no doubt about it. Or even probably Doug Ford as well, who he leads a party that has the word conservative in it, but there's nothing really about Doug Ford or his government that is conservative or right wing. But still, for that reason alone, yeah, he would have been branded some kind of Hitler or Mussolini or something, wouldn't he?
It is I did an interview with, or I did our regular show, weekly show with Renee Merrifield, former BC MLA for the BC United Party. And she came out and was very, very critical. She said this is the most far-reaching bills that she's ever seen in her life. And and she said it's the most bizarre bill ever, too. And then she said we need to sound the alarm bell. You can go watch that full video on KelownaNow.com with Renee Merrifield. We do a weekly show with her. But she was very, very outspoken on this and says that it is very dangerous to be giving. It's not even, it's just Premier Eby and his cabinet that really get to make decisions. Not even the backbenchers in the NDP don't even need to be involved in this. So basically you've cut out most of the MLAs and these decision-making powers, and it's all about the economy, and basically everything's about the economy. So basically the rest of those people can go home.
Well, they all got promotions, so I guess a lot of them are going to be involved in some way, aren't they? But yeah, I mean it's about the legislature as a whole, isn't it? And it kind of it bypasses the legislative assembly, and also the courts to an extent. But that's as it should be. I mean, we don't live in America. People often forget that we don't live in the United States where the judiciary is this kind of like almost insanely powerful force. The judiciary in Canada is supposed to just judge the laws that are made by parliaments. So, but I mean, anyway, it also excludes the judiciary to some extent. So it really does just leave it all to the executive, which is David Eby, basically. But it's, I think most people can probably understand why he's doing this. It's just a little bit unusual, especially from the former head of the BC Civil Liberties Association. It's not on brand for him, really, is it? So, and also the other thing that I would say, it's not on brand, but also he didn't really explain it properly, or he didn't really build up to it. He almost tried to like sneak it out a bit, didn't he? It was like, I think he did it on a Friday,
Yeah, but
and it was
I
like one
also
press conference. Like, if you're going to do something this huge, especially something that's so off-brand for, a left-wing lawyer as he is, you're going to have to make an enormous amount of noise about this and say, like, look, I know this is crazy, everyone, but here are the reasons. You have to win people over, I feel.
I think it's like it's also preemptive, which like there hasn't been anything that's kind of gotten in the way yet, other than themselves, and all of a sudden they're just grabbing more power, which seems like bypasses what the purpose of the legislature is.
Yeah, and the whole nature of the political system. Yeah.
Yeah. And here we talked about Daniel Smith. Daniel Smith proposes oil site trespass bill to keep federal workers from grabbing data. The Alberta government is proposing a law that would ban federal employees from going on any oil-related sites, from wellheads to corporate head offices. But critics say the province doesn't have the right to do so. See, when Daniel Smith does something, then there's a lot of outcry, right? But she says
Yeah.
Alberta will do whatever it needs to do to shield its economy from the Liberals' growth-killing lunacy. Um,
Yeah, I mean it is a little bit ironic, isn't it, that Danielle Smith is chirping at David Eby, and then at the same time she's doing this, which is obviously very confrontational and
yeah.
controversial. But I mean, in this scenario, Alberta, like I think the Albertans, to a lesser extent Saskatchewans as well, they've rightly in many ways, they've developed this kind of political culture of persecution, haven't they? Like they are the victims of persecution. So I think, as is often the case, when you have any kind of political culture like that built on this idea of um, your group as the persecuted group, you tend to feel a bit more bold and a bit more entitled when it comes to doing things like this. So that's the context, and it makes absolutely perfect sense to me why
Yeah.
she would do this and why this would be deemed acceptable in Alberta. But I think the question for Ottawa shouldn't be, oh, how can we defame this woman and make her seem like a lunatic, and like how can we get the courts involved or whatever, and try and frustrate her in this enterprise. That shouldn't be what they do. What they do, or what they should do, is try and understand why it is that Alberta has this political culture in the first place. And it's because of 50 or more years of being taken for granted by Eastern Canada, and by being refused infrastructure projects and basically wealth generation projects for decades now, and they're sick of it. So, you've got
As
to understand why this is happening.
she did say that the premier said on Wednesday that the latest legislation is a warning to Ottawa that Alberta won't tolerate unconstitutional overreaches, that it's an invitation to help build pipelines across the country. And she said if the new prime minister wants to resume an old fight, we will, and we'll fight tooth and nail. And right now there is a thing they need to cut their emissions by one third from 2019 levels by 2032. And she said that would cost. We did that story a while ago. That would cost thousands of jobs, tens of thousands of jobs, and a hit on the economy. And again, people should remember that Alberta's oil and gas sector is the single largest contributor to Canada's GDP. And the reason that we have so much wealth and prosperity in Canada is really Alberta and Saskatchewan and their minerals, resources, oil and gas, LNG, all that stuff.
It's also its contribution to global CO2 emissions is so small that it might as well be, it's like a dot in a Jackson Pollock painting. It's like, why would you even why would you even be bothered about that? We're not going to bring down CO2 emissions on this planet unless the Chinese, Indians, Americans, Indonesians to a lesser extent, and these really big countries, unless they commit and they really make a dramatic um, effort to bring down emissions, then emissions are not going to come down on this planet. For Canada to just unilaterally amputate its right leg and say, "Look how good I am," it doesn't really make sense to many rational people, I don't think.
And we should get used to this. They're going to start doling out the candy. It reminds me of an old song by Sammy Davis Jr., the Candyman can. And we're going to start to see this as the election comes, that they're going to start doling out money like crazy. The Fed's giving nearly $100 million to BC firms for hydrogen and vaccine facilities, like $49 million towards a facility that turns industrial byproduct hydrogen into fuel. The ministry says the facility is part of the company's plans to create a hydrogen fuel station network in BC and Alberta, which has also received support from provincial government and a sizable loan for Canada Infrastructure Bank last year.
I mean, many of the biggest brains on the planet seem to think that this hydrogen malarkey is barking up the wrong tree, don't they? So I don't really know what it is that you know the
Why
federal
we keep
government knows that they don't know.
why we keep shoveling money into something that doesn't seem to want to go in, and most automakers aren't really working it. So here's some inefficiencies in hydrogen. Hydrogen fuel cell is less efficient than battery electric technology. Producing hydrogen through electrolysis, compressing, liquefying, and transporting, and converting it back to electricity results in significant energy loss. Battery electric vehicles are up to 90% efficient, where hydrogen fuel cell vehicles are about 35 at the top efficiency. So look at that. And then the cost to build the network, to build an EV charging station is really not that expensive. But for a hydrogen station, it's $1 to $2 million per station. And there are very few of this in the network. And one of the things that made Tesla successful was the supercharger network. Without that supercharger network, which now almost every auto manufacturer has adopted, it would really be a tough sell. And this is where hydrogen sits right now. It's just a really tough sell because like there is no places to get hydrogen. I think there's one station in Kelowna, and I understand some of them are already closing across BC because it's just, like no uptake.
Yeah, I just don't get it. I mean, we're supposed to. I thought it was the guiding principle of the Liberal Party and everything it represents, all the people that are attached to it. I thought that that principle was trust the experts. The experts know better than you. Trust the science. But the experts, like I say, the people with like 500 IQs are saying that this is dumb and we shouldn't waste our time on it. Why aren't we trusting the experts here? Have they, because they've managed to find their own experts somewhere, like in a
Well,
minority in some like dark corner of academia?
could it be that it's a really good reason to shovel money into something that goes, like we don't know where it goes, where maybe there should be a Doge taking a look at it because they've shoveled a lot of money into this hydrogen and with no real results, and they continue to shovel money into it, which really makes no sense. Like even the EV stuff that we've shoveled money into in Canada, we've shoveled it into third and fourth rate manufacturers as opposed to leading manufacturers, and we've just got stung with Northvolt there, like that bankruptcy in Quebec where they shoveled, I don't know, hundreds of millions of dollars into it. And here we go.
Yeah. And speaking of the gravy train being opened up for anybody that wants to you know, put their snout in the trough. Mark Carney just announced in the last hour via email to us or like via press release that he's going to chuck $190 million into Jasper National Park, which he refers to as Canada's crown jewel. That sort of tells you, if you join the dots, where he is going to run to be an MP. It's going to be Edmonton, isn't it? And he's going to
Yeah,
say, look
so
at this $190 million for Jasper, just a couple hours down the road there. So that's kind of, yeah, sort of get your seatbelt on and get ready for this kind of thing because it's going to be very sort of Machiavellian, I would say.
yeah, the Candyman can, right? So then we're going to start seeing some policy stuff, and I'm sure Jagmeet had a thing that, I mean, he's irrelevant really at this point, but he's saying some stuff as well. But in addition to the $49 million that they chucked at this hydrogen facility, which again, it takes more energy to create hydrogen than you get out of it. So not sure why.
Even fusion reactors, they figured out how to generate more power than they have to put in. And yet here we are looking at hydrogen. Like fusion is like real pie in the sky stuff, like 10, 20, 30 years, God knows when we'll have it. But
Well,
at
let's
least
let's
even that, they've even succeeded there in the creates more energy than it needs area.
let's remember that when the Japanese came trying to buy our LNG, as the Germans, the Trudeau Liberals said, we don't have any LNG and there's no business case for it, but we will sell you hydrogen in the future. And that future is
Yeah,
here.
because I mean, there's such a good business case for that, isn't there? A business case where taxpayers have to subsidize it just for it to work.
Yeah, so that future is here and there's still no viable hydrogen. And even, yeah, anyway, and this is the one that, this is from Rupa. Again, I know that she's got an axe to grind as well, but if she said if she was a conservative, she'd be hammering away, and you and I have hammered away at this forever. The growth-based GDP per capita in the last 10 years, if you look at where Canada sits on this graph, no, the Liberals don't want to talk about this.
Well, I think the Liberals, I mean, the Financial Times, I cannot think of a newspaper or a media outlet that is more sort of sympathetic to the Liberal Party and vice versa in the whole world. And it's no coincidence that Chrystia Freeland used to work for the Financial Times. They absolutely love the Financial Times. That you know the sort of Western elite read that newspaper as though it were a kind of like Confucian Analects or something. They read it as a guide to life. And the Financial Times just last week came out and said all of this. They said, why is Canada performing so badly on in economics? Why have they been suffering for so many years now? So it's kind of like it's out there. Even the Liberals know about this, but it's not in their interest to highlight that, of course. But when it comes to Pierre Poilievre, obviously he's not particularly friendly to the Financial Times and what they stand for. But it would be in his interest to really blast that news out there that the Financial Times, the Economist, all of these, like Bloomberg, obviously, for a very long time, they've all been saying this about Canada's economy. Like, what on earth has gone wrong with Canada's economy? And I think the phrase that Pierre has that he's used from time to time, which is actually quite useful, is lost decade. Because I feel like people know generally what that means. They've probably heard that in the context of Japan before. So I
Yeah.
feel like that's the one to hammer. Just say, the Liberals had 10 years and it's a lost decade. I mean, that
Well,
has to be their argument.
I had a discussion with one of our more, I guess, experienced journalists here, and he said that Canada's economy is doing great. And I said, and what metric are you looking at? And he was arguing with me, and I said, what metric? Like, show me the metrics that you're looking at. And then he said, well, I don't have those metrics. I just know it's doing great. I said, well, go find those metrics, and you're welcome to join Ian and I on the show and help us see these metrics that put Canada as one of the best economies in the G7.
Yeah, well, the thing is, GDP per capita, you look at that, Canada is still pretty high in the world. Just on, not, we're looking here at growth. This chart is about growth over the last 10 years. But Canada, you have to remember, Canada started from a higher position. Canada has been a richer country in so many ways than its competitors for, a good while. Canada had like a good 30 or so years before this lost decade, so-called lost decade. So, and also, we're in North America here. Like, there's more space. There's like we're energy self-sufficient. We're theoretically, anyway, sort of agriculturally self-sufficient. We have so many advantages that the Europeans don't have, obviously, and a really close relationship with the United States that we used to have economically. So, Canada kind of was already at a bit of a high point. So, the question isn't so much how are we doing right now, though that is also pretty bleak in many ways, but it's also like, look at the trajectory. Like, why is it that countries like Spain and Italy and Japan, all these countries that were considered to be basically dead in an economic sense, why have they grown many, many times faster than we have over the last 10 years? That's got to be the question. It's about where we're going and how we're maintaining this wealth that we've been given by our
Well,
predecessors here.
I think I have the answer for you because we've suppressed our natural wealth. What's beneath our feet, we've suppressed that lost decade. We've suppressed that for 10 years because of their main policy driver. And it seems like that policy driver is going to be the same because the messaging that's coming out, it sounds like it's the same. And maybe it's been couched a bit and kind of like bamboozled in a couple of different words, but it seems like it's going to be the same policy, like full steam ahead, just a little more with different words.
Yeah. Well, I think a little bit like the UK as well, a country that I know a little bit about. I think Canada has spent quite a long time saying no to things, saying
Yeah.
no to new projects, obviously, famously, we're all aware of the pipelines and the
Yeah.
natural resources developments that have been given a hard no. But it's more than that. It's other areas of the economy as well. And, Canada, as we've discussed it many times, and we're absolutely not the only people that say this, Canada is like in a superb position for reasons that I just explained, like energy self-sufficient. That is such a gift, right? Especially at this moment in history.
I,
Like Canada is in a position to pretty much do what it wants and sort of determine its destiny. But I think for
I,
so long, the Canadian elite, at least, and probably I would say that much of the electorate has kind of wanted to hold on to what they've got. They've wanted to kind of stay in a sort of frozen period of time where it's like it's always just like the 90s or something like that, and you don't have to adapt and change and build. But the reality is you have to. You can't just expect to be rich forever. You've got to kind of adapt and move with the times.
as our resident expert in the European Union and the UK, do you think they would have squandered the natural wealth like the Canadians have over the past decade?
I think that the British certainly would have, because the British did squander a lot of their oil and gas wealth, and obviously they have a lot of coal in Britain, and they've basically made coal illegal because they just don't want to, So the British are almost unfathomably stupid. Like if you think Canada's elite is stupid, let me introduce you to the British elite. Like any sort of exam, any sort of quiz, whatever, the British will lose. They'll fail because they are so dumb that it sort of causes me physical pain to even think about it. But the Europeans are not as dumb as the British. And the Germans, for example, yeah, if the Germans had access to the kind of natural resources that Canada has access to, absolutely, they would have used it, and they would have what they did instead was use the Russians. I mean, they would much rather have used their
Well,
own
I mean,
stuff to
the
feed
answer
their
is quite
industrial beast.
the answer is quite clear with the Germans and the Japanese. They came here to get it, and we refused to give it to them.
Absolutely. And then, the rest of Europe, like look at Norway, they've gone absolutely gung ho on their natural resource wealth. The French don't really have all that much in terms of natural resources, but they're smart enough to
Yeah,
have built nuclear power plants. So they
yeah,
did, they didn't mess around, the French. They just did what they needed to do.
the French are famous for definitely going into Africa and exploiting the natural resources of Africa, though. I mean, that is one of the French legacies for sure. Canadian
Yeah.
small businesses, though, at a 25-year low, according to the Canadian Federation of Independent Businesses. So there you go, 25-year low. I mean, that's how people feel. Optimism among Canada's small and medium has been felt to the lowest level in at least a quarter century. Um, and a lot of people, I mean, I talk to a lot of people, and I could say the same thing for our business, right? Like we've been in survival mode since Bill C-18. We've been, since COVID and Bill C-18, we've been in survival mode instead of expansion mode. Like at one point we were talking about, like rolling out new now cities and doing different things. But, like right now, we're struggling to survive along with many of these businesses. We've done so many stories on businesses that have closed here in Kelowna and the surrounding area. And it just seems to be getting better, and I mean worse and worse and worse. The mounting pessimism and rising inflation expectations coincide with Trump's tariffs. Things just to be getting worse and worse and worse, and we still don't have a clear plan on our natural resources, the wealth beneath our feet.
Yeah. Well, now and then we mention the collapse of the Roman Empire, don't we? And obviously that's a bit grand. That's a larger scale. But on a smaller scale, things tend to go very wrong. And that might even apply just to like something like this, like small businesses or medium-sized businesses. Things tend to go wrong when it's like one blow after another. And that's what it's been. Like there hasn't been enough time to recover. There's been COVID, there's been a lot of legislation, and we can talk about the anti-pipeline legislation or however you want to
Yeah,
phrase that, the increase in environmental regulations. That's hurt a lot of natural resources companies.
even
Then you've got Bill C-18, which has killed a lot of the media. Then you had obviously COVID, now Trump. It's like, and then the Ukraine war as well, kind of set off a bit of a nightmare.
and even some self-inflicted stuff when we did this Airbnb policy. and which has basically hurt our tourism sector. And like the vacancy rate here in Kelowna is very healthy, yet the policy still sits there on the books, right? And all that's done is drive up the cost of hotel rates for the consumer.
Yep. I mean, and there's another one that I forgot to mention in the BC context and the Alberta context, which is the wildfires. You can argue about why they were caused, and you could definitely make a claim. You could definitely make an argument that that was sort of self-inflicted to some extent as well. But these are all like massive blows, aren't they? And it really is like one after the other. There hasn't been that period of tranquility to kind of
Yeah.
rebuild.
The prosperous years have been evasive in the last 10 years. And if we go to the polls here in April, Canadians should do well to remember the lost decade and ask questions as to what will bring prosperity back, because we know where the prosperity is. I don't think anybody can argue where the prosperity is. It's, are we willing to tap it or not, is the real question.
Yeah, I mean, especially at this period in history, I think that you have to, everything must be attuned to its times. Everything has to be linked in with the sort of global economic context. And right now, we're going through really crazy changes, aren't we? And we have been for a few years at least. And energy has never really, and minerals, like the stuff that Canada's got, has almost like never been more in demand. It's never been a hotter commodity. And we're sat there asking questions about whether we want to exploit that. It does seem a little bit counterproductive.
And we got a clip here to play from CBC, Janice McGregor here. This is in reaction to Pierre Poilievre's natural resources video he put out a couple days ago.
Other thing I just want to note as well, he said that repealing the industrial carbon pricing system in Canada would be something that would benefit workers, benefit this, as Canada's kind of future, again, sort of lower a tax burden. But it's not clear whether this wouldn't, in fact, invite a tariff burden on any future mining products coming out of Northern Ontario. Because, for example, if they were destined for manufacturing in Europe, Europe has been clear that it wants a carbon pricing system from the jurisdiction from which sort of the imports come. If there isn't a carbon pricing system for the development of critical minerals in Canada, those critical minerals could face a tariff when they are imported into the European Union. That then sets up a trade barrier that way. So whether it's a tax... There
you go. You can go listen to that full clip there, but she definitely seems to be helping the Liberals get their message out there that they want to put tariffs on our industrial sector.
It was immensely generous of her, I thought, to regurgitate Mark Carney's lines almost verbatim. Very, very kind. I hope she gets a Christmas card for that.
Yeah, no, if
But I
you
would
listen to
say
the whole
the
thing,
thing she didn't say, the thing that she didn't say that she needed to say if she wanted to be taken seriously is Mark Carney says this. That's what she should have said at the beginning,
yeah.
and then she should have said afterwards. It's not, however, clear that Europe is in a position to make demands when it comes to things like energy, because let's be honest, it isn't. Europe's a beggar, and it just so happens that we've got a few coins in our pocket. I think they're going to take our coins.
Yeah, I mean the Chinese and the Americans don't have carbon pricing schemes, and like they trade with them. I mean, the critical minerals are, again, they're called critical minerals because they're important and they're rare. Because it usually goes with rare critical minerals. So now to say that it would be tough for us to sell them to them is just plain just talking points that are being repeated, like you said, being repeated by a journalist.
Yeah, but like, let's be in no doubt. Let's just make it clear. Her pension, her income, her life that she lives right now basically depends on the Liberal Party staying in power, because Pierre Poilievre, the leader of the Conservative Party, has made it clear that he wants to defund the English language version of the CBC. So she's worried, and this is unfortunate that we have the state broadcasters journalists are in this position. It's a very awkward position to be in, but ultimately it's very rational for her to make Liberal Party points. It's very much in her personal interest to do that. So she would have to be some kind of superhuman to resist that, I imagine. If she's got kids, like it's like effectively she'll look at Polyev as taking food out of her kids' mouths. She's not gonna be neutral in that area, I think, which is why this whole situation is quite insane, really. And I almost feel like the CBC should like recuse itself or something, and just not report on some of these things, because they're obviously they're not capable of doing that without bias. Obviously, it's like their own lives are at stake. Why would they be neutral? And I mean, they didn't even need this threat anyway. They're already biased to the Liberal Party, as has been documented for many years. But this is just craziness, isn't it?
Yeah, so Pierre Poilievre says he wants shovel-ready zones with pre-approved construction permits. So he wants, no different than what's going on in the U.S., he wants stuff to get going. And I think the CEOs called for that in emergency crisis too, where they want stuff to be, to be fast-tracked. And if we want to get out of this economic funk, we're probably going to have to fast-track some stuff.
Yeah, well, look, Canada has a problem with investment as well, domestic investment. Mainly, we have all of these like glorious pension funds and everything in this country, and there is money floating around, or capital, I should say, to give it its proper name. But not all that much of it seems to ever like go into productivity boosting projects in Canada. And one of the reasons for that is because of the regulatory regime. If you want, if you want to invest money, usually related to retirement or pensions, you want to make sure it's a pretty good bet, don't you? And when it comes to Canada and investing in things like, let's say pipelines or whatever, or this Ring of Fire thing that we were just talking about, you want to have a very high amount of confidence that it's actually going to work. It's not just going to be money down the drain. But the sad reality is that often in the last 20 years or more, it has been money down the drain, hasn't it? Because the projects have sometimes they've sunk billions of dollars into like these projects, and then they've just died. It's kind of like that's the last thing you want as an investor. So it's a question about like how Canada uses its capital, I think, as well, which is really at the heart of the productivity debate.
Yeah, and then to be fair, Mark Carney, when he was here in Kelowna, he used the phrase, and he accuses Poilievre of using these phrases, these three-word phrases, but he used the phrase, build, baby, build. That was going to be his mantra for Canada. And then I watched a speech from J.D. Vance this morning saying he said just Trump's main phrase, build, baby, build. And he said that's their driver too. So maybe, like this Trump coming out and favoring Mark Carney, also like borrowing some of his lines.
Yeah, maybe. I mean, but the reality is like, if you want Canada to continue as a going concern, especially when its sovereignty is being put into question, this kind of thing is just this is like non-negotiable, isn't it? These projects must be built.
Yeah.
And I think the Liberal Party is aware of that, and a lot of surveys, which political people who live in their little bubble don't actually get to meet that many people from the real world. They kind of rely on things like surveys on polling companies, and the polls are all showing that there's huge amounts of willingness from the Canadian public to build pipelines and LNG and all the rest of it. So I think they're going to have to move with the times, otherwise they can't hope to stay in power, and certainly can't hope to win an election. But you just have to remember, when people, or political parties or political candidates, when they go through these Damascene conversions, you have to ask why. And I would say for the British Columbian audience, I would say look at David Eby. Look at the David Eby in the run up to that election last year. He basically changed every single one of his main platform points. He said he's going to abolish the carbon tax. He's going to throw people in asylums and mental health facilities. He said he was going to change the open drug use. He's going to really crack down on crime and drug use in BC. He completely changed his colours, and then he won the election, and now not so much. We're not hearing so much about these things, are we? Now it's like he's very reluctant to get rid of the carbon tax all of a sudden, isn't he? And it's you've got to be careful.
Yeah, he stretched the rubber band for the election, and then won the election, and then it just went back. Yeah, because and then a
Yeah,
$1,000 rebate disappeared as well with that stretch.
yeah, that's another thing. But you have to remember, like when the opposition is strong, and unexpectedly, the BC Conservatives in that election were strong, and they got to the point where they really freaked out the NDP because they started to actually lead in some polls, and there was panic among the senior sort of leaders in the NDP, and they basically, David Eby was almost like apologetic at one point. He's like, I'm so sorry, like I've kind of neglected public safety in particular. He said he didn't say exactly those words, but something along those lines, to that effect. It was like he was being remorseful because he saw his support disappear. And then the opposition of Pierre Poilievre, obviously it's kind of been doom and gloom for Poilievre the last few months, but overall he's been a very strong opposition leader, and he's made the Liberals concede loads of areas of their policy, like the carbon tax, capital gains tax, immigration, and so on. So you have to understand it in that context. The Liberals are ultimately fighting for their lives. They're fighting for their position in society, for their incomes, all the rest of it. Their fame, their entire like perception of themselves is bound up in this. So they're kinda, they're liable to say anything to be elected. So you just have to bear that in mind. And if it was the other way around, we should stress, if Polyev was the prime minister and Carney was on top in the polls, you'd expect Polyev to move left, wouldn't you? And Polyev to say things about the environment and whatever else, because they're trying to maximize their potential vote collection, aren't they?
I think if Polyev was the prime minister, he might be facing some more pressures from the media, though.
Yeah, well, there's no doubt about that. I don't think serious people would contest the argument that the media in Canada, the main media outlets, are generally more favourable to the Liberal Party than they are to the Conservative Party. I mean, yeah, that's just a fact of life as far as I'm concerned.
So here was a big Liberal promise near the end of their tenure under Trudeau that they were going to meet all these great housing targets. And according to an internal memo, this is the Holly Blacklock story, that they knew that the target was faked. And that was in a secret internal memo last June 18th, acknowledged it could not meet the housing targets despite repeated promises to the public.
Yeah, it's pretty damning, now, isn't it?
Yeah, so they just basically what you just said is they actually were doing what you just said. They just said whatever they needed to say to get votes in favor with media and the public, and they knowing full well that they couldn't meet those targets.
Well, they were being, you look at this from last summer, they were being roasted, weren't they? They were being burned alive by not just the Conservative Party, but like for once the media as well, and also like the banks, and all kinds of reports were coming out from everywhere about what an absolute catastrophe Canada's housing market was. Usually connected to immigration in some way, and they were flailing, they were desperate, and when you're in that position as a politician, you need something, don't you? You need a sign to point at. You need to be able to say, yeah, it's been tough. That's why. 3.5 million, and once you've got these numbers and you've got these promises and you've got a picture of Justin Trudeau with a hard hat on, with a building site behind him where houses are being put up, then you've got something to fight back with. But whether or not that's based on reality, that's always the question, isn't it? And it seems like in this case,
Yeah,
alas, it wasn't based on reality.
it's to meet the construction demand, they would need to increase their construction by 220% from 220,000 homes built annually to 700,000, which they knew that they couldn't do. Right? I mean, they just make these like even Mark Miller, one of his last things he did was like give fast track immigrants in the construction industry, but 6,000 of them. I mean, that's not going to change how many homes get built.
Yeah, but then they can receive a memo like this. Let's just imagine Justin Trudeau. He can receive a memo like this, but still keep a kind of intellectual consistency by saying, no, we can do this. Like
Yeah.
John F. Kennedy style. Like, we're going to do it not because it is easy, but because it is hard. And like that's where that's where the political bollocks comes into it. And he just says, no, 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 I know you say that, but you're a naysayer. we're going to do this, even though, obviously it was never going to be done, was it? Unlike the moon landing, this was never going to be done.
And then this is the one that you and I have talked about relentlessly. If you watch our show on a regular basis, you would have heard us say this many times. And this is now industry saying, forget the EV mandates. So automakers yesterday petitioned British Columbia to repeal its electric vehicle mandate that was first in the nation. The BC program set the pattern for a federal mandate that proposes to outlaw the new sale of gas and diesel-powered vehicles by 2035. And it's not just that. This is an escalating scale. So this is British Columbia's target of 90% zero-emission vehicles by 2030 is not achievable, manufacturers said, and dealers. The best-case scenario, which does not include significant trade disruptions, would sales increase by 50%, 57% by 2030. So again, the Americans have dropped the EV mandate. If we don't drop it here in Canada, you can kiss the auto market goodbye here in Canada.
And, is there a single person, is there a single expert, everybody's favorite term, is there a single expert on this planet of any particular worth or note that said that this was possible, that this was a good idea? Because as far as I'm aware, the answer is no. Nobody thought this was a good idea.
No. So the BC legislature in 2019 passed the Zero Emission Vehicles Act, mandating 100% sales target for all new vehicles in 2035. Zero emission vehicles last year accounted for about 21% of sales in BC. And then they've, a couple of things they do, they would say everybody wants to drive an EV, and then they just, took away the rebate for Tesla because it's a political reason. So that's the best EV maker out there. So they do that. And then they also get rid of the EV PST credit. So you don't have to pay PST on used EVs. And then the federal transport dropped the $5,000 rebate because they ran out of money. And then, so it doesn't even make any sense. How are people supposed to make this forced switch? People will switch to EVs because they're cheaper, better, and faster, right? You don't need to punish them. And you need to stop punishing the automakers too.
Yeah, it's almost like they've arranged the regulatory system and the legal system to make an environment that is the least favorable possible for the sale of electric vehicles. Because the other thing that obviously you mentioned Tesla there, you mentioned the removal of these incentives, but they've also, in effect, banned Chinese EVs, which are the cheapest in the world. So if you're really serious about this EV thing, all of that would be swept away. Tesla would, obviously it's a bit awkward right now because Elon's associated with Trump and all that, but you would get rid of that. You would reintroduce incentives. You would try and bring these auto manufacturers on board rather than threaten them with fines, which is just nuts, like a crazy authoritarian scheme to fine them for not selling 100% EVs. And then you would open up the market, completely tariff-free trade with China for EVs. If your ultimate aim was 100% EVs, if that was truly the aim. So we have to wonder what actually is the aim, because they're not acting as though that really is the objective.
Their actions are completely different from their mandates, for sure. And then we're going to get to it later here, how the Saskatchewan and Alberta farmers are suffering because of that tariff that was put on Chinese EVs. This is Eleanor Sturko in a tweet, though, and says, in 2020, the NDP used $55 million of your tax dollars to build a 110-room Howard Johnson Hotel in Granville to house homeless people with severe mental health and addiction issues. Not only they're not getting the care they deserve, it's destroyed businesses that employ 10,000 people with an estimated economic loss of $750 million. We've seen that here in Kelowna as well.
Yeah, Sturko, she's on the ball, isn't she? They must the NDP must absolutely hate her guts, really, because she's very active and busy, isn't she? She's doing exactly what she should be doing, I think, as an opposition MLA. But
she's got a flashlight and she keeps shining it, right? And that's what her job is, right?
Yeah, exactly. And even if you're an NDP supporter, you should be grateful that we actually have people that can do this job, because obviously we really need opposition. But this is something in particular this has been annoying people for some time now, hasn't it? So it's also low-hanging fruit to an extent, but that's what she should be doing, really. So there you go.
We were going to play this clip, but I don't know if we'll play this clip, but maybe we'll play it without the sound so we can talk over it, and then we'll just go for a bit. So they've released some preliminary information on the crash there in the Toronto area.
Hi, my name is
And they don't really say much in this report, though. Yeah, maybe we just could cut it back. That's good, Rommel. Yeah, they don't say much in that
Yeah, it's a
report.
funny one, that.
No.
I mean, the biggest thing is that they just acknowledged that there was all of a sudden, like 3 seconds before touchdown, there was this like dramatic descent, obviously. And if you watch the video, you can see that happen and that's what
Yeah.
causes the flip. It's almost like the bounce or something, isn't it? But yeah,
Just,
with it being a preliminary report, they haven't like assigned blame or gone into like details about what the pilot did or didn't do and all that kind of thing. This is very much like this is just like the foundations of the house that they intend to build, I think.
yeah. Yeah, so I mean, they are working on it. I guess that's the main story. But they did say what, the wheel snapped off, which caused it to tip onto its wing, rip the wing off, and end up on its roof. Really, that's all they really said.
Yeah, I actually think the most interesting thing about this isn't what they said, but rather the way that they said it. Rather than release some like 9,000 page PDF written by somebody that struggles to express themselves in English, they did like a 2 or 3 minute video. Well, they did do a report as well, but they did like a 2 or 3 minute video on social media. It's like, that's good. That's like, I appreciate that commitment to transparency, because so often these institutions that we rely on for like really important information, they just bamboozle you with like the most garbage language where they barely speak English. They're just using like 15 syllable words and they can't write in clear sentences. But here's TSB releasing a video sort of saying, with a guy that sounds like a professional voice actor, kind of, it's like, it's admirable, I would say.
Yep, I like that for sure. And then again, it goes to prove that X is one of the most important platforms out there when it comes to news and financial information, because people mostly go on X when they release stuff, including this BBC News tweet here that says China executed 4 Canadians for drug crimes.
Yeah, Jolie has been talking about it as well. Melanie Jolie, the foreign minister, and as usual, just kind of sounded a little bit whiny and weak and ineffective. Didn't really say anything that the Chinese would care about. Whereas the Chinese just came out and said they broke the law in China. We do not recognize dual nationality. So they had Chinese passport and Canadian passport. So they just said they just ignored the Canadian passport, which they've done. They've always done that, the Chinese. That's not new. And then they said, there you go, Bob's your uncle. They're dead now because they committed drug trafficking crimes. But obviously, it's not that simple. The Chinese hold foreign prisoners or prisoners with foreign passports as like almost like hostages. We know that with the two Michaels thing, don't we? There's been many examples of that kind of thing. So this is a message, I would say. Make no mistake, this is a message to Canada, which is like, you're on notice. So we've given you the 100% tariffs on canola. We're trying to cripple your agricultural or one bit of your agricultural sector, and now we're killing your citizens, executing your citizens. So it's almost like this is this is China just sort of like giving Canada the finger basically, and just, or maybe not the finger, more like the cutthroat gesture where it's like, watch out, because like
Yeah,
we're not happy with you.
and here's the question of the day, because there's so much attention on Trump and his tariffs, and China's done the same thing, and this is it escalated it, and where's the reaction from our mainstream media and from the liberal politicians?
Yeah, it's just not expedient, is it, to try and drum up a boycott of Chinese products? It's also completely infeasible, isn't it? It's not really possible because Canada decided a long time ago to
And we've seen,
uproot and destroy its industrial capacity and export all of that industrial capacity to China. So now we rely on them. So if we want stuff, we need it from China.
and we've also seen that the country that seems to interfere in our election process is China's name most of the time. Yet, a lot of silence from the media and from the liberals on China, and this that they should be making a lot of noise on. And the person making a lot of noise on this, though, is Scott Moe. He said canola producers brace for that 100% tariff, and he said, and we played it a couple days ago, was that canola markets are tough to build, and this is a huge loss for Saskatchewan farmers.
Yeah, and it's all as a consequence of what we talked about earlier, Canada putting 100% tariff on Chinese EVs. And they just hit back for maximum, to inflict maximum pain. And, it probably furthers their ends as well because they'll be thinking about the possibility of Western separatism as well. And they want to try and do what they can to worsen that. And, they also targeted aluminium, I think, as well, didn't they? Oh, no, they didn't. That's something that Canada did. Canada targeted their aluminium and their
That's correct.
steel.
Yeah, that's correct.
Yeah. And no, the other thing that they targeted was pork, wasn't it? And
Yeah.
fish
Basically,
products.
our
So that
basically our ag industry. Yeah.
yeah. So that the Chinese have, as Donald Trump would say, they kind of have all the cards, don't they? We don't have any, or we don't have many cards when it comes to China. But I do think it's like I do find it baffling. And I've said this a few times. Why are the Chinese not Why are the Chinese not trying to capitalize on this split between, or this apparent split between the US and Canada? And I think it's a combination of things. I think they're too arrogant anyway to ever sort of do what would be necessary to make nice with Canada. That's not how the Chinese have ever operated in the whole history of all the dynasties, Tang dynasty, the Qing dynasty, all the rest of it. They've never behaved like that because it's not in their DNA to be friendly to other people. They position themselves as the boss, and you have to come and ask them for a favor. And obviously, Canada's not going to ask them for a favor. But I think that's one reason. And I think the other reason is maybe they don't believe it. I don't think that they believe that there's a real split between the US and Canada. I think they might think this is temporary and it's not worth it. So they've chosen instead to be hard on Canada, which is also a way of being hard on the US, which is their main rival.
Yeah, and I mean, for me, the silence is deafening on the reaction to China. And I think just because it's politically advantageous to use Donald Trump as the main adversary, as opposed to looking at what China's doing. I mean, this should be executing for Canadian citizens should be like that should be what we should all be reacting to, and because that's one of the worst things you can do to a citizen of another country.
I mean, yeah, can you imagine if the Americans did that?
Yeah,
Dual nationals, American, Canadian nationals, and they executed four of them at the same time without any notice or anything like that, like obviously politically motivated. If that happened, I reckon Mark Carney would be jumping into a tank if we've got any tanks.
likely not.
Yeah, probably. And if we do, they probably don't work.
You and I were talking off camera there yesterday that the only hope we have to building our military in Mark Carney's time frame is to attend one of the UK garage sales again to see what we can buy from them. Because it takes time to order. Now they're talking about scrapping the F-35 deal, and then maybe buying like a French made. I think the French and the Japanese are making a jet. But I mean, how do you get in line for that? Like, where is that line then? What is that? 10 years out, 20 years out? Because the French and the Japanese are probably going to take first if they're the ones building them, and they don't
Yeah,
build them over the
between five
weekend.
and 10 years. There are two options. There's German, French, and Spanish, I think. They're on one team, and then the other team is British, Italians, and Japanese. The British Japanese one is considered to, as things stand, to be the better one. But yeah, I mean, this is all like they haven't flown them yet. They're still very much in
Right.
construction. They're being built. So I mean, it's with things like this, especially fighter jets. I mean, it wouldn't be unusual for there to be like delays of 5 years or even
Or
10 years or
more.
something
I
like
mean,
that.
they're
So
going to,
yeah,
if they're building them, they're going to take first, right? Because they're going to, stock their own military, especially nowadays, right? When most countries need to stock their military, and where's Canada sit in that line? It's not like definitely not first, and they don't build these things in a weekend.
absolutely, yeah. But this makes it also a little bit odd that Carney and Jolie now have made it clear that these meetings with the French and British leaders, a lot of that, and also when Trudeau, if you remember, when Trudeau went to Europe and was kind of like the odd one out because it was a European conference and he was just
Yeah.
there for some reason from Canada, um, or from North America, I should say. That was no, we're now learning that that was actually about Canada trying to join in with this new European security deal. Because they've been talking about this for ages now. Macron, particularly, has been speaking about this, and it's a real thing now. They're actually trying to create some kind of like security arrangement, some kind of like European NATO kind of thing, where it's just the European powers. And Canada, under Carney, wants to be a part of that. So it's kind of, I mean, that is an odd one, isn't it? It's like the Europeans don't really have much of a military for starters, and if they do get one, if they're for real, it'll be about 10 years till they've got one. So what are we going to do in the intervening decade?
Yeah. Gold. Sounds like a lot of Canadians are getting bullish on gold, and again, likely worried about the trajectory of the Canadian dollar and a bunch of things like assets priced in USD is usually what gets favored. I did see a story out there say that Canadians are dumping their U.S. stocks. I find that hard to believe, but there you go.
I find it funny that, I mean, that article, it's a CBC article. They talk about how people invest in gold like stocks, basically, so gold companies. I find it a little bit odd. It's like if you're skeptical about the sort of global trading system and you want to get something that's like can survive when all that collapses, why would you buy a stock? Why wouldn't you just get the gold itself? It seems to defeat the purpose of gold. Gold is about something that you can like hide under your bed and just
It's
pick it out when you need to.
Gold has done extremely well over the past, I would say, eight or so years now. But the gold stocks have not done well. And just recently, they're starting to come back to life, but they have not done well. Even though the gold price is, like tripled and stuff like that, the gold stocks have not done well. And a lot of that has to do with some of the management and some of the gold stocks and that. But like I said, recently, they're starting to react more favorably. And I think a lot of that has to do with the climate here in Canada on being able to build a mine and replace reserves that are being depleted.
Yeah. Well, we're gonna have to see if the next government, whether it's Carney's or Poilievre's, whether
Costco
they're a bit more serious on that kind of thing.
Costco started selling gold both in Canada and the U.S. I mean, I think about a year ago now, and they can't keep up. They can't keep up on the demand. I mean,
Yeah,
people.
I thought was that not during COVID that happened? Because I remember that
Yeah, they
being a bit
started.
of a laugh.
I think at the end there, but a lot of other cultures in the world really favor gold. Canada being one that doesn't, right? Even the Americans favor gold more. But like you talk about Asian markets, China for sure, India, and definitely the Arab world really favor gold. A lot of the Europeans still favor gold a lot. But
Definitely the Indians, like the
yeah,
Indians, big time.
the Chinese too, right? Chinese and Russians have been building reserves over the past um, I'd say last 10 years. And central banks have been buying gold, which is a switch because prior to that, they'd say 10 years ago, they were net sellers of gold, including Canada sold all its gold. And the UK was selling off its gold as well.
Back in the heady days of 2015, when Barack Obama was president and everybody thought that the liberal order was going to last forever.
Yeah. We got a few more things to get to, and here's one that touches us. A new for the Canadian Centre for Policy Alternatives again says since 2008, media outlets being decimated, and that's we know that ourselves. Like Bill C-18 is a tremendous hurdle for us, and then the Liberal government selectively funding some outlets and not funding others has made it like it's like they put their knee in your throat at the same time where they fund your competition.
Yeah, they put. I mean, in our case specifically, they mentioned Kelowna in this report, and they say Kelowna is actually a bright spot in the Canadian scene because it has quite a lot of outlets. But it's like if you want to drill down into just us and our experience, yeah, it's the government has put its knee in our throat by enacting a bill that Facebook said they hated, and Facebook said if you do this, we're going to remove news from Canadian users, which they did. That sort of crippled us, destroyed our audience. But then, while that knee is in our throat, they also put their hand in their pocket and threw gold bullion bars, freshly purchased from Costco, into the hands of our rivals here in Kelowna. So, yeah, it's I mean, we're not the only ones. We shouldn't make it just about us. There's a few outlets in our weird position, but yeah, it's like that double whammy. friends to our rivals and very, very vicious towards us. But the stat here that I think is very interesting is where it says nearly 2.5 million Canadians live somewhere, like a postal code, where they have no news outlet. I mean, that's bad, obviously. That's that's very, very bad because Canadian press and the Globe and Mail and CTV and all that, they aren't going to go to a council meeting, like they've got bigger fish to fry. They've got meme articles to write. They've got articles about Trump to write and stuff like that. They're not going to go and do the necessary scrutiny of local institutions. So it's obviously, I mean, that there's a serious threat there to the democratic system.
Yeah, I know it's just outlandish, right? That like they're selecting who to fund, and then like the CBC, Pascal St. Onge, who was the head of the Heritage Fund or the Heritage Minister, said that the CBC needs to get double the funding. In the meantime, outlets like ourselves get continued pressure to fold.
Yeah. And simultaneously, the government is giving money to Facebook, which apparently is the great enemy. That's the reason for all this craziness that we're experiencing. That's the reason that there's a war between the federal government and Facebook that we've been stuck in the middle of. It's because Facebook is apparently evil, but at the same time, the federal government is giving them money to advertise on their platform.
We should definitely check in with them and see how much the Liberals are going to spend during this election, or how much they've spent since they have banned themselves or said that they were going to boycott Facebook. Again, it's a U.S. company, and you're supposed to spend money in Canada, according to the Liberals. We should find out how much they're spending right now on Facebook.
I would predict very confidently that the Liberal Party will not provide that information to us. The only reason that we know that the federal government spend that money is because they have a kind of obligation to tell a Canadian citizen when they ask a question about something, about money being spent, they have an obligation to reveal that information. Obviously, a lot of the time they don't still, but they have that obligation, whereas the Liberal Party have no such obligation. And you can't send an FOI to the Liberal Party, so I think they'll just say no.
Mm-hmm. Well, we'll see.
And then we'll find out in like 6 months or whatever. Elections Canada will tell us, and it'll probably be not very favorable.
So let's move on to markets. Gold, just still holding that $3,000 mark, 3037. Again, gold is your canary in the coal mine. Bitcoin, we talked about it, looked like it was ready to start moving back towards that $100,000 mark. Looks like it's slowly doing its march up. There you go. And then the Canadian dollar, again, looking for, now it's going to get an election. It'll be interesting to see. I'm sure it's going to kind of like pause and hold in here and see who gets elected. And you're going to see a reaction one way or the other, I think, on who gets elected.
It actually, it went up today to 70 cents from 69, so it likes the idea.
Yeah, it likes the idea of an election. Yeah.
Yeah, but I guess it's going to change its mind quite a bit as this progresses.
And then I know everybody's watched Star Wars, and remember that famous character R2-D2? Well, NVIDIA basically made an R2-D2, and we're going to play this little clip here. Just jump ahead. No, a little bit back.
Blue hat. How do you like?
Back a little bit. Back a little bit more. There you go. We're just gonna watch this.
Tell me that wasn't amazing. Hey, Blue.
There you go. There you go. There's R2-D2. That's NVIDIA. Jensen Huang there displaying. They got two NVIDIA computers inside that little guy there. and it's showing you that robotics are a real thing. And if you watch the whole thing, go and watch the whole thing. The little robot there actually, he points to where he wants to stand. It's like a little dog, actually.
Yeah, it follows instructions, isn't it? It's not perfect, but
No.
it's about as good as you'd expect. It's like it's similar to other voice recognition software, isn't it? It's like it does it eventually, but I don't know what purpose this is going to serve exactly. I
Well,
think it's just a test, isn't it?
just think of it as a pet. You don't have to have a pet at home, and you don't have to clean up after it. It'll clean up after you.
It's a lot better than a Tamagotchi, which I can remember having many moons ago.
I remember, I can't remember, 1991 or something, I bought a robot that it still had a cassette player in it. And it did some basic, you could kind of program some basic commands in it. It was the shape of an R2-D2. And it was pretty basic. But I mean, that was way back in 1991 that I bought that thing.
Yeah, I mean, now with the tiny chips and super powerful chips and whatnot, it's we really are living in the future, aren't we?
And then a little bit of news on Grok. It'll soon generate some videos. So there you go, Grok. And we're going to start to see this stuff accelerate like crazy, right? So operators.
Get ready to see videos of Donald Trump headbutting Elon Musk and stuff like that, I imagine.
This next video, we're going to play it and just show you how crazy people are with their hatred for Tesla and Elon Musk. And then if you get offended easily, or if you get like grossed out or whatever, maybe just maybe you just call it a day for right now, and join us back here tomorrow. But again, fair warning: this guy is a little unhinged.
Do ba 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 do boo do a boo ba do boo boo ba do a do ba do ba do.
That's probably good, Rom.
It's pretty gross. That could be one use for the robot. Can it come clean that off?
But like where are you in your own mental health if you think sticking your finger and then what, you know what I mean? Like, I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, he doesn't look like a healthy person in any regard, this chap. I think he's probably in need of some care.
I'm at a loss for words if this is your way of protesting. I don't even think they know why they're protesting. But like that seems odd.
Yeah, but one good thing about Teslas is I presume that he would have got an alert. The guy that owns the car would have got an alert on his phone, and he would have been able to watch the video. So he knew that something weird was happening, and then he could clean it.
And he's also famous now. This guy is also famous. He's all over the internet, like absolutely everywhere.
Yeah, well, that's the other thing. Like, why did he? It seems like it was a very spontaneous act. Like he didn't like have a mask on or anything like that to hide his identity.
And then this other guy has come out and said, and this is another thing on this Tesla hate is, he's saying he's explicitly calling on Americans to kill Tesla to save the country. I mean, there's something wrong with people. It's literally. So we played that clip yesterday, where Tim Walz, the guy that was running to be the vice president, gleefully reporting that he has an app on his phone that shows you when Tesla stock goes down and he wants to see the company die. American company, right, that employs tens of thousands of American employees. Seems like a bad look for a guy running for vice president. Sounds like he was on the Gavin Newsom making the rounds. He was on Gavin Newsom's podcast saying completely outlandish things. Like one of the comments he made on Gavin Newsom's podcast, that he's willing to street fight Republicans. That he says he can take them all.
Did he mean that metaphorically?
No.
I assume he did.
He can fix a truck and he can fight and he can beat anybody up.
It's a very odd thing for a weird little fella in his 60s or 70s or whatever he is to say, isn't it?
That's what I'm saying. You got to go listen to it. Like I don't know who he's trying to appeal to. Like I have no idea. Like if this is what they can muster up, they better go back to the drawing board.
Well, I think that is very clear, isn't it? That they need to sort of do a nationwide search to try and find some talent because they really, really have nobody. I mean, they're so lacking that the strongest person right now is probably the chap you mentioned, Gavin Newsom. He's
Yeah.
probably the best they have, and he's got a lot of flaws, let's say, to put it lightly. He's got a lot of baggage, and he's
Yeah, well,
not long ago he was looked upon as a bit of a dud, but now he basically is their best hope.
he's starting his podcast, and maybe he'll become the next Joe Rogan. I think that's one of the things that they're looking at. They think they lost the election because of Joe Rogan, because they had a podcast, and that the Democrats don't have a podcast like Joe Rogan. Little did they realize that Joe Rogan was a Democrat. They just started doing stuff that was far left, and that Joe Rogan said, "I can't be part of that." So there you go.
Yeah, and then they called him far right.
Yeah, there you go. And here's something. Here's our meme section. This is where we kind of have a little bit of fun, although we had a little bit of fun just a couple seconds ago. There's the pyramids, and then a cutaway showing you what's underneath.
That would be fun, wouldn't it?
There you go. That's the meme and a half, right? And the next meme we got here, Babylon Bee. They just continue to deliver over and over and over again, right? Trump agrees to give back the Statue of Liberty. That was that French politician that wants it back, and he said in exchange for all the land that the Americans liberated in World War II.
Does that mean that we also get it? Because Canada played an outsized role in the liberation of France.
I think we should be calling up Macron and laying claim to the beaches of Normandy.
We'll take it, yeah. We'll take Juno.
There you go. And the Democrats say this is hilarious if you read all those things. Remember with all the stories that came out whenever something happened, it was always about climate change. Democrats say fire at Tesla facility likely caused by climate change, not activists. Right?
I feel like instead of Democrats, they should have used the word experts there, and that would have been perfect.
There you go. And that's our show for today. We try to have a little bit of fun at the end. Definitely appreciate the comments and that you follow along. And then it'd be great if you shared it, liked, subscribe, do all those things. We also do a newsletter that goes out 365 days a year, 7 days a week. Got a good contest on there right now too, a spa thing that from a local business. We definitely are a local independent media outlet, and we try to also showcase lots of local independent media outlets. Local independent retailers.
Yeah, not the independent media outlets in Kelowna, because there's only one, and that's us.
Yeah. There you go. Doing what we can and hanging in there. It's going to get pretty hot here in the next little while at this election. Like I said, you can play that song in your vehicle as you're driving around. The Candyman can, because expect a lot of candy to be doled out, because right now they need you. They actually need you. You, the voter, your vote does matter. So really use your common sense. Don't give it away to somebody. Don't even listen to what we say. Don't tell them. We're not going to tell you how to vote. But use your common sense and say, is this good for Canada? Is this good for my family? Is this good for our community? Because we all live in a community. We have to be worried about the ones that don't really care about community, and they're more worried about global pressures versus what is good for our community and Canada.
And we talking about politicians giving away stuff. We might even get an interview with some of them, because they're going to be coming and begging for votes.
Yeah, that's the time they're listening, because we even got interviews with Premier Eby during the election.
Yeah, back when he was a little bit afraid about possibly losing his job.
There you go. Not so afraid now, though. There you go. Look at that beautiful background. Beautiful day here in the Okanagan. Blue sky, traffic flowing well, beautiful background, beautiful city. And you're saying it's beautiful out there in Ottawa, the nation's capital?
Not so beautiful. It's a bit cloudy, but it is about 12 degrees, which I think that counts as its own kind of beauty, doesn't it?
Well, get ready for some door knocking, Canada, because they're going to be coming out and knocking on your door, and make sure you hold them accountable, because they don't really want to answer questions anytime when they're elected. They just want to answer questions or tell you promises right now. And that goes for everybody. With that said, we do thank you for watching Kelowna Now.
We don't just report the news, we live here too. We're your neighbors, bringing you stories that matter to all of us. No government funding, no outside influence. Kelowna Now, local, independent. News you can trust.